Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I'd like to take a little bit of a personal privilege. My grandmother turned 99 on Saturday, and I'd just like to kick off Women's History Month telling my grandmother's story, because 100 years ago, she never would have imagined that her grandson would have the opportunity to tell her story like this. When she was growing up, her grandmother and her grandparents told stories of being shipped away to Native American boarding schools. She grew up in a time and a place where her history was a liability and not a strength, where her family and friends and community did not feel comfortable teaching her about it. And so much of her story was lost. And this weekend, I got an opportunity to sit down as my one-year-old son sat for the first time with his great-grandmother, and to listen to her talk about what it was like growing up in rural Oklahoma, growing up in a space that her grandparents were brought to. And so my grandmother was born February 26, 1923, and she was born in Beggs, Oklahoma. She was born less than a year after the Tulsa Race Massacre, less than 40, 50 miles away from it. Her older brothers, her family dealt with that. Tulsa was the big city growing up, and she always had memories of a learned trauma and that space, and didn't feel comfortable talking about it until just in the last couple of years, as people as a nation have started to talk about it. She's seen 5 generations. She's got children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And she's moving around and able to talk about it and share the experiences that she's had over that time. And that's a lot, because when she was 2 years old, she was made a citizen, because Native Americans weren't when she was born. The Native Indian Freedom Citizen Suffrage Act of 1924 was passed because Native Americans at the time enlisted in World War I at the highest per capita rate, something that continues today. That's why Native people got citizenship, because we signed up for the military. Because when the bell called, we came. We signed up and said, hey, send me. And that legacy continues. And as we talk about spaces, the legacy of discrimination continues to happen. Her husband, my grandfather, signed up to be a pilot in what was going to be the first Army Air Corps, and he was fair enough that they mistakenly thought he was white. And so as he gets through his training and is going fine, all of a sudden he gets kicked out because they realize that he was actually a black man. And so unlike a generation of folks who sent their husbands and brothers away to fight in World War II, her husband got sent home because he was black. And that was the reality of the day. It was the experience that she continued to live as she grew up in a time where the civil rights movement happened, where she was treated differently because, unlike her brothers, her ID at birth said Indian, her middle brother had said colored, and her oldest brother had said white, because the doctor looked at him and said, white, colored, Indian. Same parents, same doctors, same space. But that's what the documents say. That's who they are. And that's the reality of this space. As she dealt with women's suffrage, she raised and moved north with a generation of black people, with people all over, because of the auto industry, because the community she was raised in and lived in Oklahoma, there were no jobs, there were no opportunity, and instead of having no space, she came up here because her big brother had a great job at Ford. And the first thing she did here was teach. She taught Head Start for years. She got her college diploma in her late 60s. And she also sent 6 kids to college. Could you imagine someone who had gotten their degree after 6 of their children? That's the kind of person that my grandmother is. And it's just been a blessing. And I know as we think about these moments, as we think about all the spaces and the time and history, we continue to make it. And she continues to do that. And I'm grateful that you all let me share a little bit about my grandmother, Marcel Douglas, because next year she's going to be 99, and we are very excited to tell that story. And I hope you continue to tell the story of the folks and women, particularly this month, who have impacted our lives, because we don't do it enough. Thank you, Mr. President. I ask my remarks to be printed in the Journal.
Without objection to order.